Greetings and welcome to the latest edition of the Entheogenic Evolution Podcast. As always, I'm your host Martin, and I'm happy to have you with me today as I am joined all the way from jolly old England with Bruce Rimell, the author of the book They Shimmer Within, which is a long and fascinating, truly fascinating book addressing the question of why visionary beings and why intentionality. He takes a very broad look at the nature of the appearance of beings in psychedelic and visionary experiences, and, like myself, has come to the conclusion that no, they are not, quote-unquote, real. They are artifacts of the human mind, and he has a very extensive exploration for why that is the correct answer. So it's a great interview. We get into talking about art and about music and about Salvia Divinorum, as well as his very long and very interesting book. That'll be coming up in just a couple minutes. But first, this is the point where I would thank people who have made donations and contributions in support of the podcast over the past week. Yet, I do not have anyone to thank, so this is my opportunity to remind you that your financial support helps make this podcast possible, helps pay for my time that goes into producing it and preparing for it, and also helps pay for bandwidth and storage of the various episodes that go out on this podcast every week. If you would like to support this podcast, it's quite easy. Just come by my personal webpage, www.martinball.net, and use the PayPal link at the top right of the page. Or even better, join up as a supporting member over at my Patreon page, which also has a link at the top right of my personal webpage. Or you can go to patreon.com/martinwball, and there's everything from $1 a month up to $100 a month with increasing benefits and access throughout. I hope you guys enjoyed the first installment of Oribai's Vision last week. Of course, that's what will be coming up next week and in between interviews. But after next week's installment of Oribai's Vision, I will have my interview with Jeremy Narby, which is actually from a few weeks ago now at this point, but I've been holding on to it to coincide with the release of his new book about tobacco and ayahuasca. So that's coming up on the podcast, and other interviews are in the works. So things are chugging along here nicely at the Entheogenic Evolution Podcast. So if you feel like supporting that and keeping this long-running podcast going, which I've been doing since 2008, a little PayPal donation would be awesome. Of course, if you would like to arrange a consultation session with me to talk about your entheogenic experiences and get a non-dual perspective and reflection on that, you can stop by at www.nondualentheogenicintegration.com, and I'm available for 30, 60, and 90-minute consultations. And I think that's about it in terms of announcements and things I have to say. So let's go ahead and get into a rather lengthy conversation with Bruce Rimell. And there are a few audio problems. You know, it tends to happen, especially with longer interviews. The longer you talk to someone, the more likely there is to be a little audio glitch here or there. But other than that, I think everything comes through just fine. It's a nice long conversation. You might want to break it up into a couple different listens. But here's my really fascinating conversation, really getting into the heart of the philosophy of what is the nature of visionary beings with Bruce Rimell. Enjoy. So there are so many things I want to talk to you about today because there's there's so many possibilities. But let's just start. I want to make sure I've got your last name correct. Is it okay? How would you pronounce it? Rimell? Rimell?
Rimell.
Rimell. Ooh, okay. So yeah, I was off.
Rimell. I'm not sure. I think it was my mother's affectation, but most people say Rimell, but I've always been taught Rimell. So yeah.
Yeah, was that something your mom was a stickler on? No, it's Rimell.
Yeah, I just grew up and it's Rimell, and everyone's like, "Are you sure it's not Rimell?" I'm like, "Yeah."
Yeah, but your family is British?
Yes. Yeah, pretty much. Born and raised in the West Country of England. For our American audience, you might know the West Country as the pirate accent. I was born and raised in Wiltshire, which is very famous for Avebury and Stonehenge, the 5,000-year-old megalithic monuments.
Yeah.
So that's the kind of landscape I was raised in: hills and standing stones. So yeah, it's always a strange rural place to be raised in, really.
Yeah, it sounds kind of neat. Well, definitely having the accent on the last syllable of an English name would be very unusual.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, we had always assumed, because I've not known my father since I was a child, so we don't have any family history
Hmm.
as to where the surname came from. But I'd always assumed it was French, precisely because of
Yeah. Yeah.
that stress. Um, then I don't know. It was about 10 or 15 years ago. This huge British surname survey came out. Oh, you can check your name online and find out where it comes from. Apparently, all Rimells, and the makeup company Rimmel London all come from a Worcestershire village 800 years ago. Now, Worcestershire is in the Midlands of the UK, about 40 or 50 miles from where I was born. So that's where we all come from. And apparently the name means border battle, referring to battles between the English and the Welsh. And the Welsh border's just not that far away.
Yeah.
So yeah, funnily enough, it's kind of curious that it's a name with roots. But yeah, I always assumed it was French. Turns out not.
Yeah, well,
So,
there's actually a little English history to my own last name that I found out that I'd been told that my ancestors came from Ireland, and then I learned that the last name Ball or O'Ball or sometimes O'Balls was actually the name of British immigrants to Ireland, so it's not really considered to be an Irish last name.
yeah.
And then I had genetic testing done and found that actually my British ancestry would be Nordic, so that my ancestors
Oh,
would have been like Viking invaders
yeah.
coming to England and then invading Ireland and then coming to the United States. So
That's exactly what happened. You see, now I live up in the north of England, in Yorkshire. Now, Yorkshire in the medieval period, early medieval period, was basically a Viking kingdom. The city of York was called Jorvik, which is a Viking name. It had a Viking king. And funnily enough, you look around Yorkshire and everyone's blonde, tall,
yeah,
and with this kind of rounded jaw that if you're European, you do associate with people from Scandinavia and Iceland. And you know the Norsemen, the Vikings, also set up a kingdom in Ireland, so that would make perfect sense. That would make absolute perfect sense.
yeah. So
So yeah,
the history
excellent.
of invasion. Yeah, yeah,
You know, if you live on an island, that's basically it. You
yeah.
know, you are one. You're a descendant of one or more invaders, immigrants, incomers. That's what island life is. You know, so yeah.
Yeah. Well, there's so much of your own history that I'm curious to get into today. So, just to give the listeners a little background, I just posted on Facebook saying, "Hey, I've got a lot of time for reading this summer. So, if you've got a book that would be worthwhile to talk about on my podcast, get in touch." And you reached out and sent me a PDF copy of your massive academic work, this They Shimmer Within, and I just finished reading the book yesterday. It's one of these books where sometimes when people send me books and they're multiple hundred pages long, I'll try and just read the interesting bits. But everything in your book was very, very interesting. So I'm really
Oh
curious
well,
to,
that's
to
very kind of you.
yeah, I'm really excited to talk all about it. And also yesterday, while I was working on a new book myself, I was sitting here formatting and editing, and I just put on your music. And I listened to, I think, all of your albums on Bandcamp
Oh wow.
yesterday as I was working. And that was quite enjoyable. And of course, you've got your own art in the book itself. And also, you recount a lot of your own experiences with Salvia Divinorum in the book.
Yeah.
So we have got a lot to talk about today. Um, but I think maybe a good place to start is that my take on your book is that this is really this is like graduate level work. This is not necessarily a popular book about psychedelics. It's very academically focused. It's very high level discourse and analysis and argumentation, and I really love that. This is not in any way light reading. So I wanted to ask you, what is your background? How is it that you come to this level of this evolutionary cognitive psychology and philosophy? I mean, it's just really fascinating. So let's learn about you, Bruce.
Well, I suppose, I mean, I got to say, the book's like what, 580 odd pages. It's a case of, I wrote a book back in 2015 called On Vision and Being Human, which was a series of kind of vignettes of thoughts. And towards the end, I kind of put forward this theory about, visionary beings and machine elves that I wasn't really happy with. And so this book was really written, and I thought I would write a kind of a 100-page correction of these couple of chapters in this previous book. And it just went on and on and on. You realize sometimes you start a sentence and you realize you had more to say in that sentence. Well, this was than you realize. Well, this was a book. And I realized that this was a chance to kind of integrate everything that I thought I knew at the time, because I wrote the book in 2017, 2018. Everything I thought I knew. And as I kind of sat down planning it, I thought, well, I'm an artist, I'm a musician, I'm a dedicated psychonaut, whatever that might mean. But my academic background is in physics. So I've got, technically my degree was in astrophysics. But I also, I had a specialism, ended up specializing. The mathematics of mass statistics is the same, but I ended up specializing in quantum mechanics. There's a lot, in terms of the mathematical modeling, some of it's quite similar. A lot of it's quite different. But, that's where my ground state is. I'm not a hard-nosed rationalist, but I do, in the end, require a scientific explanation. I do think rational explanations are possible for many psychological phenomena and internal human phenomena. So that's one hand. I've got this kind of, and I've got this interest in human origins that started out in anthropology and paleoanthropology, the biological evolution of the human being. But that quickly slipped into things like cognitive science and evolutionary psychology, and I've done talks for the radical anthropology group over in London, who posit some very, very fascinating ideas for the origins of ritual behavior and language within humans that actually draws from the paleoarchaeology of red ochre usage in southern Africa about 150,000 years ago. All sorts of fascinating scientific interests that I have. That's on the one hand. On the other hand, I'm an artist who draws upon visionary and psychedelic experiences, and if I'm honest with myself, many visionary and psychedelic experiences that I've had as a child with migraine experiences, and then as a psychonaut, and then, various different ways to engender these altered states of consciousness. Many of them present themselves to the senses, to the human experience, as being of supernatural in nature and order. Mm-hmm. Now, I love those experiences. Some of them have radically reorganized the structure and motivations of my life and my understanding of the human being and myself and the world. And yet I am a scientist at heart. I am perfectly happy and grounded and centered in the overwhelming evidence that there are no supernatural entities in the universe. The universe is not governed by supernatural agency, gods, spirits, and so on and so forth. And yet, human beings create gods and spirits at every turn, in every part of our lives, for a whole host of reasons. And I quickly realized that visionary experiences aside, psychedelic experiences aside, hard-nosed rationalism aside, there was a really good question I could be asking, and it seems like not many people are asking this question. Why? Why do we create gods and spirits? Why do we see them when we have visions? Why do we build our societies around, gods and spirits? And there are lots of different explanations, but it seems like the two mainstream ones are to demand literalism. Well, actually, gods and spirits are real. Never mind 400 years of science. That's all nonsense. They are literally real. I know because I've seen them and they've spoken to me. Well, one can't use one's own experience to explain a phenomenon or make human demands upon the world that the universe must be as I expect it. That's a very human thing to do, but it's not. We can't unknow what we know in the 21st century. The other mainstream thing is to say, oh, you silly religious spiritual people, it's all delusion, it's all nonsense, it's just your brain doing some little thing and you're only going with it because you like to believe it because it's comforting and lovely and sweet. And, it helps you deal with death and the darkness that is the universe, silly, silly humans. And I just think, well, that's not a very good answer either, because it doesn't really allow you to ask these important and quite human scientific questions of why we do these things. Surely a better resolution of this problem is possible. And from a psychedelic, from a visionary perspective, I think it's important to try and offer a rational explanation whilst not in any way robbing ourselves of the authenticity, the brilliance, the mind-blowingness, what the bloody hell just happened to me, authenticity of these experiences, these visionary experiences. And I do find it funny when kind of people on the delusional side of the debate kind of say, well, it's comforting. It's, religion is comforting, spirituality is comforting. And then you hear of someone who's had a DMT experience, with some alien elves that are doing all this probing and horrific stuff. And I'm like, that's not comforting. Yeah. There's nothing sweet and warm and lovely about that. Similarly, I remember probably the from the world's religions, the greatest nightmares are the Sumerian Gala demons, who I mention them in the book in relation to ideas about the underworld and about death. And these people, these demons, these dark creatures, have no voice. They know no mothers, they have no fathers, they do not drink, they do not eat, you cannot bargain with them. And, the idea that gods and spirits are, some ways, trying to help us deal with death, and then the Gala demon comes along and says, you will not bargain with me, I am death, that's that. There's nothing comforting about this. If it's a delusion designed to help us deal with the darkness, then surely we would come up in general with much sweeter, more comforting images than we see in a lot of religion and visionary discourse. So yeah, I thought a better resolution of this problem is possible, and one that can potentially integrate these complex rational understandings of the human being that are starting to emerge from things like evolutionary psychology and cognitive science with these visionary experiences, and particularly the experiences that we have with particularly strong psychoactive substances that engender encounters with beings, very often mind-blowing encounters with apparently discarnate entities that are not of us. I couldn't have invented that. Where the bloody hell did that come from? And that's really what my motivation, my background and my motivation for writing this book. So yeah, quite a big ask, I thought, quite a big challenge for me to kind of do something. On the one hand, that it was quite big, but on the other hand, it was quite humble and quite small, because I was basically trying to extend the cognitive science of religion into visionary experiences, and the cognitive science of religion is a body of scientific discourse that tries to explore and explain religion from a kind of evolutionary, Darwinist, but also cognitive set of perspectives. So yeah, it was, I quite a big ask, but also from a scientific perspective, not a big jump, not that big a jump if you're familiar with the cognitive science of religion. So yeah, that's that's the short, he says, laughing, the short answer to your question, I guess.
Yeah, because the book itself is definitely not short in any way, and is so
Yeah.
just thoroughly comprehensive and brings in so many different perspectives and so many different resources and different academic works. I mean, it's a very, very impressive book, and I think
And what I wanted to do, because I was conscious I was bringing in lots of stuff from disparate sources, I didn't want to have to just say, oh, and refer to McKenna here, refer to Atran here. I wanted to take time to explain each of the bodies of work that were involved in what I was trying to put together. So the idea would be that the book would be kind of self-contained. You could go and explore these other people, but hopefully you get a good idea of what these people were saying from what I've done justice to everyone, in the book. But yeah, anyway.
yeah, well, certainly you can look through your list of sources and then just the pages and pages and pages and pages of footnotes and references that this is a well-sourced book. I don't think anyone could ever ding you on that and say, no, you didn't do your research, Bruce. I mean, you definitely did your research. And I want to talk more about all of that. But actually, I'd like to back up for just a moment, because I think you're probably the first person I've had on the podcast who actually is trained in physics and has a background in quantum physics. And this is something that comes up. It's interesting because I didn't realize that in reading your book, but it comes up in several different places really throughout the book, because in so much of New Age discourse and spirituality, that the fallback for everyone is always, but quantum physics. And
Yeah.
they use that for their metaphysical mumbo jumbo. And we have
Yeah.
like even right now, and the book that I'm working on is about my sleep disorder. And one of the things that I was looked into during my sleep disorder was the work of Dr. Joe Dispenza, who is a chiropractor, and he talks about how you shift your quantum consciousness. And honestly, I mean, my reaction is I get irritated when I see non-physicists using quantum physics to bolster their own metaphysics. And it's just like, well, you don't understand quantum physics. So I would like to hear directly from a quantum physicist, what is the problem with non-physicists leaning on metaphysical interpretations of quantum physics to support their worldview?
Yeah. Well, firstly, let me say I'm not a quantum physicist. I'm a graduate with a training in an academic training in physics that had, a strong quantum mechanical component. I don't want to lend any of your listeners any idea that I'm in any way close to being an academic quantum physicist.
Okay.
But I do have an understanding of what I think should be really called the fundamentals. And a lot of people are aware of the mind-blowing icing on the cake that really confirms a lot of deep-seated human anxieties and expectations about the world, that my consciousness is unconditionally real, that my consciousness can have a supernatural effect upon the world. So the stuff that's the icing on the cake is the idea that the measurement of a quantum, a subatomic particle, or a quantum wave, what's called a wave function, which is a measure of the probability of where a quantum particle can be in space and time. So you can't say it's definitely there. It's somewhere in this area. It's a 75% probability of being here towards the middle, less so as you go out, and all this kind of stuff. The kind of icing on the cake is that we hear that a particle, an electron, say, can be a wave and a particle. Well, which is it really underneath? No, wrong question. Wrong question. That's not a relevant question for the most fundamental part of our universe. That's something that we humans do. So let's take, for example, the double slit experiment. We fire a single electron into two slits. Does it go through the left one or the right one? No, it goes through both because it's a wave. But then when we block off one slit, it goes through only the left one because we've measured it. And in the early 20th century, a lot of physicists were saying, okay, well, it's very clear that the conscious act of measuring something can change what is measured. Okay, this got out into popular discourse as basically being, oh, consciousness has an effect on the universe. When you look at something, you change it. What the physicists didn't really explain, and what got missed, was the act of observation in a scientific context is basically to put a bit of energy into that system, is to shine a light on it or to modify it in some way, and it's to put a bit of energy into it. Now, when I said, is an electron, when it comes down to it, a wave or a particle? What is it underneath? A quantum phenomenon or a quantum system in what's called superposition, where it's not being measured, where it could be, it might have a probability of being here in the middle or a little bit further out on the edge. When it's not being measured, it's not really real in the sense that we understand it. It doesn't have quality or property or characteristic or nature. What it has is probabilities that it might be this or that, if we then go in and measure it. So how does a quantum system become, quote unquote, real? Well, what happens is, by random fluctuations on its own, it achieves a threshold of energy. It goes above a certain energy, whereby the quantum system then becomes kind of real. I'm here, and I have this property, I have this much charge, and I'm a particle. Now, the act of observation puts energy into that system. So it trips over the system into achieving that energetic threshold, where it takes on specific characteristics. And it's kind of abstract and complex, but essentially what's happening trillions and trillions and trillions of times all over space and time, without any conscious mind needing to observe it, quantum systems everywhere, between me and you, down the cables that are linking to us, are quite happily achieving energetic thresholds and becoming real all across the universe. So this book, if I put it in a dark box somewhere, doesn't need my or anyone else's conscious mind for it to be real in the universe and objective in the universe. It is already objective, by the conglomerate of these trillions and trillions of achieving energetic thresholds. Where we kind of went wrong in putting it out there to the popular mind was by saying, no, consciousness, the act of scientific observation of a single quantum particle, that is everything. That is everything. No, it's really just a special case of a much more general idea of a quantum system achieving an energetic threshold. And I'm mindful that's really, really abstract. And I'm sure a professional quantum physicist will kind of go, well, no, I think you've missed some of the fundamentals as well. But Paul Dirac in the early 20th century, what he did is he came up with a number of different equations where, I think it was Paul Dirac, I might be misremembering that. Anyway, there are a set of equations which basically narrate objective reality as a series of emergent phenomena coming out of and becoming real out of essentially a fundamental set of principles that mean quantum systems needn't be real in the sense that we understand it, needn't have nature or characteristic or phenomenology, if you like, phenomena-ness. And so, yeah, that's really, I don't know how to finish this particular explanation. You know, the fundamental nature of the universe from a quantum perspective is an absence of characteristic, but characteristic emerges through quantum systems interacting with each other and achieving energetic thresholds. A very, very special subset of that is the idea of scientific observation coordinated by a conscious mind. That's not a general case of the universe.
Yeah. And none of that means that you can just pull a potential self out of the quantum ethers into manifestation through your conscious choice, or that it doesn't necessarily mean that there are infinite possibilities of every single transformation of energy that exists. And so there's all these multiple universes and multiple realities that then we can tap into through quantum consciousness and observe other beings and other realities and, you know, all the metaphysics.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of that is, you know, highly abstracted extractions, you know, from basically human expectations of the world. Is my consciousness unconditionally real? Does it see the world as it is, or does it just see what it wants to see? What is something like an electron when it's, you know, when fundamentally underneath it all, when an electron's on its own, what is it? What's its nature? What's its characteristic? All of those are wrong questions. You know, does my consciousness see the world as it is? Well, funnily enough, at the most fundamental level, there is no world as it is. There is an absence of characteristic. There is a world as it is on a, you know, a larger scale, the non-quantum scale. Does my consciousness have an unconditional reality? Well, I mean, that's completely unknown at this time. Consciousness is really, you know, sometimes I think it might be more honest, more scientifically honest, to use a piece of white noise than to, you know, rather than say the word consciousness, because it, you know, it's a wildly unknown quantity. So yeah, a lot of the abstracted quantum consciousness stuff serves a human expectation. You know, the reality such as it is, or perhaps the non-reality of quantum phenomena, is far more abstract and far stranger. And it does underline, you know, for me, the idea that religion, one of the contracts underlying religion is that if it's filled with gods and spirits and it kind of operates as I expect, that's a contract. The universe operates kind of how I expect. Well, science offers no such contract. Science, the fact that we are continually surprised by scientific observation and scientific data of all kind is really a powerful demonstration that the universe is under no obligation to follow any ideas that we expect of it. But that also applies to the structures of our brains and the workings of our minds. It's perfectly possible. And evolutionary psychology and cognitive science is beginning to kind of propose this, that the workings of our mind needn't conform to any expectation that we understand of our minds. That, a personal unconscious might be perfectly all well, but, the deep-seated structures of the mind might be filled with batteries of dumb servants performing tiny, highly specialized, almost menial tasks. And, funnily enough, this is what one branch of cognitive science and evolutionary psychology proposes. And when you get into that and you look at what's called the massively modular structure of the mind as proposed by this model, funnily enough, it starts to explain culture. And it starts to explain culture not by imposing structures on it, as structuralism does, or, by demanding that everything is all performance and subjectivity and, as post-structuralism does. It doesn't impose structures on it. It just proposes this model. And then gods and spirits and religions and art forms and politics and society seem to emerge from this in ways that are remarkably authentic to how we observe kind of human cultures cross-culturally to be. And it begins by proposing a structure of the human mind that is nothing like anything we expect, nothing like anything we would even like our minds to be. So, I think that's what excites me about science. Terry Pratchett once said that the fifth element was surprise, and I think, that's a really the fact that we are constantly surprised by science, I think, is a really powerful confirmation of its explanatory power. Yeah.
Well, speaking of surprises, let's talk about Salvia Divinorum for a moment, and then let's get back into the book. Salvia Divinorum is a character that shows up in many different ways in your book and based on your own personal experience. And I really like that that's in the book, and you acknowledge that even though you're writing something of a very academic book, if you were within an academic position, you wouldn't be able to really include your own personal experiences with Salvia Divinorum in the book, because that would be an academic no-no.
Yeah, and that's why I self-published, because I really, I know how to lay out a book and, make it visually beautiful and design and all of that. But really it was down to, I want to write this book as I want to write it. So if I want to go to a spiritual publisher, I'm going to have to be all spiritual. If I want to go to an academic publisher, I can't talk about, the elephant in the room that we all know, we've all experienced, otherwise we wouldn't care about these questions. So yeah, I really wanted to set out my position. I've had these experiences, now let's explain them, but I don't want to rob the authenticity of them either. So yeah, that's why I went set on the self-publishing route, because I thought, I don't want to compromise on any of this. The thing about Salvia for me, so people will say, they'll ask you and they'll be like, what's your teacher plant, your psychedelic, your psychoactive, what's the one that you've worked with the most? And I say, well, for Salvia, and for 4.5 years, pretty much, as I recall, every Friday, come rain, shine, and I do believe I'm not lying when I say in one case Christmas, that's what I did. I would sit in kind of ceremony, if you like, with salvia, and I would go off on my own voyage with that. Um, and people, the reactions you get, the reactions are like, oh my God, there was one guy who's done like 100 ayahuasca trips, 100 ayahuasca ceremonies, and he called me a maniac. And I'm like, some people would be like, oh, you're so hardcore, man, salvia. And I'm like, no, no, it's not wild. It's not hardcore. It's just very, very different. No one, if you speak 3 or 4 European languages, and then someone comes along and says, hey, I speak Japanese or Mayan, no one says, oh, wow, that's hardcore. They go, oh, that's an interesting, very, very different language. And I'm convinced that people with low to mid level, I don't know how far I can take this, but low to mid level neurological, neurodivergent dispositions. I have ADHD. Perhaps some of your listeners can tell that from the way I talk. Um, but I also, since I was a kid, I've had migraines, very visual migraines with the flashing lights, the aura, and they got quite visionary. I'm mindful that I'm talking to someone who has a sleep disorder. I don't know too much about that, but for me, the fact that you like salvia and have a sleep disorder, I like salvia and have migraines. There's something about migraines and salvia that have a kind of common language. And I wonder if a common experiential language, and I do wonder if the same is true for you. I'm totally speculating there. I have no idea. But I have found, perhaps this is subjective, but I have found, people who have migraines and psychonauts who like salvia, that Venn diagram overlaps quite a lot. Um, so yeah, I just find some brains seem to like salvia, and I'm not quite sure why, but I've got my own little, speculative ideas. So yeah, it's different. It's weird, but it's not wild and hardcore. It talks in my brain's language. By contrast, I have to say cannabis, I can't go near that stuff. And the majority of people are cool with that. Majority of people, or cannabis products are wonderful for them. For me, it's just jarring. But salvia, beautiful, beautiful. Love it. Wonderful plant.
So, how do you like to consume it? What's your preferred method of usage of Salvia Divinorum?
In recent years, it's more a leaf quid. I like, as I've gotten older, moved, resolutely into joyful middle age. I've liked a slower, less intense relationship, and also
Mm-hmm.
tea. Which doesn't bring any of the psychoactive, strongly visionary feelings or experiences, but it does give you that kind of muga, no mind, that kind of pair of eyes looking out and nothing else, that space between two thoughts, as I call it, that I characterize, the tail end of many salvia journeys. But when I was doing my 4.5 years, Friday come rain, shine or Christmas, it was smoking. I did graduate to kind of plain leaf, but I did, extracts and things like that. So yeah, never went to the really strong extracts, but yeah.
Okay, yeah, I was going to ask if you ever did like the under the tongue liquid extract.
No, I
You
never
ever
did.
tried
That
that?
was Daniel Siebert's product, wasn't it? I always wanted to,
Yeah,
and I
yeah,
must
yeah.
try that. I must try that. I would say to myself, oh, but I've got this extract, and no, next year I will treat myself and buy some of that, and it just put it off and put it off, and I never quite did. How was that? I guess you did.
Yeah, well, the word of warning is that it hurts like hell. It burns so bad. The first time I did the liquid extract, just my immediate reaction was like, oh my God, what have I put in my mouth? Oh my God, this hurts so much. And it just like tears welling up in my eyes. And I actually took it in the kitchen and I wanted to get to the couch, and just walking from the
Oh,
kitchen to the couch, the liquid's kind of sloshing around and just burning in my mouth. But then by the end of the 15 minutes, my tongue was like moving around my mouth, and I was like, where's more of that burn? And I was like totally into it at that point. And there's like, and the salvia was
yeah.
fully on it. So I was in it, but then my mouth felt burned. My
Oh,
gums, my lips, my cheeks, it felt burned for like the next 2 weeks. Cause I went with like a really
yeah.
strong dose. I didn't really dilute it, but
Yeah.
it hurt. But in terms of the salvia experience, it was great.
Fantastic. I mean, I always remember, I saw these after I started working with Salvia, but the YouTube videos of people doing
Yeah.
50 times extract and like, it won't stop, it won't stop. And I'm like, yeah. I mean, if your first time is you're torn straight out of your body and suddenly you're in 40 places at once, experiencing 20 years of time in 20 seconds in 2 minutes in 45 years and several centuries all at the same time, of course, you got to work up to that stuff.
Yeah.
You got to, I one of my more amusing experiences was I was a table in a Paris cafe for 20 years for 2 minutes, whilst also being outside as an observer on that for 20 years for 2 minutes. These weird multiple spatial experiences and multiple temporal experiences, they take a bit of training. I don't think you can just jump straight into it. So I do kind of wonder if some people who might have been naturally well disposed towards salvia freaked out because their first time was with a 50 times extract. I think the strongest I ever did was a 10 times extract, and it took me 6 to 9 months to work my way up to that. I really took it slow. I mean, luckily I was quite sensitive to the stuff. I remember my first experience with just plain leaf was fairly strong, and I was already experiencing things like light having physical force, and all the stuff that I ended up calling space training. But eventually I got through. I broke through to what Terence McKenna calls that other place that didn't feel like a state of mind, which, by the way, from a cognitive perspective, is very, very significant. It doesn't have to be a real place. It can be, a set of cognitive constructs that you're completely unaware of. But anyway, I broke through to those places and started experiencing all sorts of wild and wonderful encounters with beings. And yeah, eventually the physicist in me is going to fold his arms and go, okay, there's plenty of these experiences now. What precisely is the hell is going on? And then in 2012, I had an experience with an extremely strong dose of 2CB and 2CI and broke into that other place that didn't feel like a state of mind whilst resolutely being in the world. And having, the cover of the book depicts the experience where I had these two beings on my shoulders directing my entire experience and life and body and time and space for the entire night. And that was the thing that was kind of the straw that broke the camel's back, where the physicist, kind of in me, the rationalist in me kind of said, okay, you've had 8 years of fun and exploration. Let's talk now. Let's see what we can find. And, like a visionary with a mind-blowing experience with DMT, I went on a long quest for some kind of, truth, for want of a better word. Because that's what we all do when we have these experiences. We go on a quest for truth. But for me, a kind of subjective truth wasn't quite enough.
Yeah.
So, yeah, kind of interesting. But yeah, Salvia was the one that pulled the rug from under my entire life. The joke I always says is she takes everything and gives you nothing in return. But that nothing is nothing with a capital N.
Yeah.
I'm always fascinated by that.
Yeah, well, Salvia is definitely a very, very interesting one, and so many just bizarre experiences with that one. And it's so unlike all the other psychedelics. It's just very, very unique in how it presents, and it's understandable that a lot of people get freaked out by it. But let's now
Yeah.
return to some of the subject matter of the book, and maybe by way of entry back into it, something that's come up a couple times already is we can talk a little bit about machine elves. And so this is something that I don't know if you're aware, but I have, years ago I wrote articles basically saying I don't buy any of this stuff. I don't buy any of this
Yeah.
DMT machine elves. I don't buy this tuning into channel dark matter. I don't buy into this reality is made out of translinguistic matter and we're all going to create UFOs out of language on December 22nd of 2012 and fly off into the cosmos and join our alien brethren. I said that this is just nonsense. And that's something that I have received hate around for years and years and years, that people have really not liked the fact that I said, I don't think we should take Terence McKenna literally. I don't think we should take any of this stuff literally. And that
Yeah.
rather than asking, what is the nature of the visionary phenomenon and their reality, we should be asking, what is the nature of the one who is perceiving this stuff, which is kind of the question of your book, of what is the nature of the conscious
That's
mind that is creating these
that's a
perceptions.
beautiful way of framing the question. I love that. That's like so beautiful that I'm almost angry with myself. I'm like, damn, I really wish I'd thought of that, to put that in the book. That's like, what is the nature of the one seeing?
Yeah,
Yeah.
which is really what your book is about. And what I like,
Yeah.
you start with by saying psychedelic visionary beings have been treated as their own phenomenon. But you say, I want to look at it in the context of everything that we know from the anthropological record of human beings
Yeah.
and the nature of spirits and beings. And that's where you get into this question of agency, of intention, of borders as being primary areas in which visionary beings or spirits show up. And then you talk about what is the supernatural nature of them, and it's just, you put it into a very human context, and then you get into the cognitive evolutionary psychology and constructs of the mind and how this has created human culture and society. And so you put it all into a much deeper and wider context than just looking at visionary phenomenon, completely separated from everything else. So maybe let's start with there about, and this is like the first chapter of the book is just this amazing catalog of going through all this different anthropological material of all these different kinds of spirits. So let's start there a little bit.
One of the things that strikes me when we talk about, and I have to say, on the matter of machine elves, I've seen them. And, but I've seen, or something that I similar, I've seen them with Salvia, and they are mental. They are wild. Astonishment is very definitely the word. But yeah, I'm with you. The interpretation, the experience, I'm with. I think it's a possible human experience. Yes. You may have experienced it or you may not have done, but it's a possible and powerful, mind-blowing human experience. I don't buy all the interpretations. One of the things I think I say at the end of the introduction was one of the maddening things about Terence McKenna is from an experiential perspective. He's right on. He was such a poet in describing the kind of like nature of the experience. But his ability and his right on there was only matched by his complete way offness to constructing any kind of coherent explanation. It was just, buzzwords and abstraction. Very, very good, emotive, poetic abstraction. But when you come to an explanation, yes, you're right. What is the nature of the seer? Not which is seen.
Yeah.
And I call this putting, I do call this putting the visionary cart before the cognitive horse, and there's a lot of that going on in even quite scientific psychedelic discourse. And the thing that really stole over me is that as psychologically mind-blowing and as special as these visionary experiences undoubtedly feel, psychologically primary is one way I put them. They're not unconditionally special. They're not discrete experiences that are locked away from any other human experience. They are not even sometimes at the extreme end of many of the folk beliefs in what I call wild spirits and visionary beings. And I think really it's not in the kind of high theological religions, the grand philosophical speculations and theologies of the high civilizations of the old and the new worlds. That we can really find the links. Where we really find them is the folk beliefs. You know, the elves, the demons, the folks who live under the water, the ones who live at the cliff edge, you know, the ones that look after wandering children or make the noises in the house where no one sees and no one goes. Where the human eye does not go, under the river, in the cave, in the deep dark forest, you know, in the cellar, up beyond the clouds. That is where we put faces, and we put human-like faces because of the humans have a whole range of existential anxieties, from death, you know, the possibility that our friends and our family are lying to us and plan to do us wrong, you know, and deceiving us. But also the unknown. We have such a strange relationship with the unknown because humans are quite fearful of the unknown. On the other hand, there's this thing called curiosity, which by its very nature is an attraction and a reward to the unknown. You know, our myths are filled with the heroines and seers and prophets who bravely go into the unknown and come back with something amazing. So yeah, these human faces, these supernatural human faces in the unknown. And it got me thinking that, you know, and in case we start to wonder, well, you know, that's just for primitive people. You know, as our universe's boundaries expand beyond the solar system, that becomes also a psychological boundary of the unknown. And, you know, in the early 20th century, the aliens came from Venus and Mars. Now they come from the Pleiades, Sirius, another galaxy or another dimension, you know. And yeah, that's just in some ways, that's just us trying to process the expansion of our cosmos in view of scientific insights. And, you know, when you look with an enthusiastic but a rational eye at the alien mythos, man, they're just our little wild spirits, you know, that come from the edge of, you know, they look after us. Some of us, you know, ancient aliens, you know, they are our ancestors. Well, you know, wild spirits and elves have been interbreeding with humans for thousands of years, you know. There's an entire society that lives under the Nile River, according to one Sudanese society. And, you know, regularly one of them comes out and takes a human woman as a wife. You know, it's been going on, you know, these beliefs are nothing new. But it then started to steal over me that if we are going to buy into cognitive science, then there is a vast realm of the mind that is completely closed to conscious attention and never, ever will be open. That is full of a massive battery of task makers, and, you know, there's a little circuit in your brain that kind of, when it sees a human face, faster than anything assumes a human mind. So, okay, that's a human mind. Oh, hello. Oh, it just brightened up and said hello back. I was right. It's a human mind. And it releases a battery of super fast inference systems, as Pascal Boyer calls them. And these are massive, and they generate a vast like possibly billions of unquestioned, natural, in inverted commas, conclusions and intuitions about ourselves and the world. And that's not the same as saying they're of the world, they're of us. And they are not of the personal unconscious. They are not of a collective cultural unconscious. They are not, as some Jungians and other psychologists talk about, an animal mind. They are uniquely human systems, but they are completely closed from us. And the only time we can ever get even the vaguest access to them is when we do something odd and really just counteract them. So my favorite example of this is, even if you're an atheist, you're born with certain expectations of what a serious God should look like. Well, hey, my religion is of a God who only exists on Wednesdays. And his divine decree is that he shall only be worshipped on Mondays, which is a day when he doesn't exist. And also, he punishes those who do what he tells them to do. Now, I mean, there's a point where your listeners might be going, they might be laughing because it's surreal comedy, or they might be going, what? There's like somewhere in my deep, I don't know what humanness, there's a series of red flags that have just gone, what?
Says gods don't work that way.
Twitching. What? And I've just tripped your inference systems. That can't possibly be right. That can't possibly be a serious-minded religion, And that's the only way we can get access to them, is by doing saying odd things like that. And so, yeah, I mean, really the fundamental idea of part one of the book was to say, yes, encounters with visionary beings are mind-blowing and special and psychologically primary, but they're not unconditionally special, and they're not unconnected to other human phenomena, including existential anxiety phenomena, like the unknown, like, the beyond. Yeah. I don't know everything about the universe. Oh, really? But the ego me knows everything. I know everything about the universe, right? No, Jesus. I don't know what you're thinking right now. Maybe you hate me. Jesus. God, that's really dark thought. Maybe the forest is out to get me. So we put these human faces on these deep-seated... To call them nightmares would be too strong. To call them anxieties and unsettling feelings that are simply part of being human. And the human mind is the same. There is a boundary within our mind. I had a delicious, in my 2012 2CB, 2CI experience, I had a delicious kind of almost self-referential confrontation of this existential anxiety, where these visionary beings sitting on my shoulder directing my world said, hey, traveler, do you really think you're in control of this wild thing that you're riding? We are part of you too. Do you really think you are all that is in your head, in your mind, in your brain? And, the more I started to think about it, the more hilarious I started to laugh about that, but the more unsettling it is. My consciousness is not really that very big in my mind. There's a lot I don't know about, and that just gets presented to me as an intuition, as a conclusion, as a set of feelings and reality expectations. And I'm not remotely in control of any of those. But maybe during, visionary experiences, we get to confront that boundary too. And sure enough, what we do is we people them. And, we fall back on some of our most intuitive ideas about the world and each other, which is agency and faces and sociality, and when cognition gets maxed out, we do fall back on our most intuitive expectations. And I would say an intense salvia vision or a DMT vision or a 2CB, 2CI experience is pretty much the dictionary definition of your brain cognitively maxing out. And so you do fall into these fundamental reality expectations that you have no control over. You're human, you are born with them. They are part of the structure of your mind. And we can be reasonably sure of that because they appear in every culture.
Yeah. So there's
that's really what part 2 was about, of the book.
So there's a couple different things going on here. One is looking at the continuity of experience throughout human cultures and history. And just in reading your book and what you've described here, I was reminded of my own experience as a graduate student when I was reading a lot of different anthropological works and particularly focusing on like shamanistic experiences. And then I got into aliens and UFOs and stuff like that. And my impression was, oh, this is just the same stuff transposed into a modern technological scientific society. That these are the same themes. So we see a lot of the same themes, and that there's a continuity, so that it's very much an expression of the human experience. And then we have these cognitive features of, as you say, these reality expectations, that as soon as we see we project faces all the time because we're socially conditioned and biologically conditioned to pay attention to the face. And as soon as we see a face, then that comes with a whole set of cognitive assumptions that just immediately come online of, oh, this face is connected to a mind, and that mind has intention, and that mind can communicate, and that mind is aware that my mind is aware of its mind.
Absolutely.
And so it creates this whole relationship with the projected face, and that's what's going on here at a very deep level.
The thing that's really important to remember about all of this really is that the only thing in all of that that's unconditionally real is the human face. That's an objective thing. We see a human face and we assume a human-like agency with a human-like mind. Well, go ahead, crack open my skull and pull out my brain and search within it. You won't find a scrap of mind. Mind is potentially entirely unreal. Mind may be, a human expectation, but it's one that we can't live without. How on earth would a human interact with another human without this quick idea of mind, of agency, of an invisible little human inside yours and mine's head operating the body like some giant puppet, and yet it's completely wrong, and even if we say mind is consciousness, then, we know enough about the mystery that is consciousness to know it's not a discrete thing just operating the body like a puppet. So this battery of inferences is fundamentally wrong about what human brains are doing. And yet, in the realm of sociality, of the extremely complex, evolving game that is sociality among human beings, it is absolutely essential, and it is for all intents and purposes entirely real and so useful and so complete that we don't just use it for humans, we use it for everything, because 90% of our life is other humans. The 10% of our life we start thinking about non-human things like animals, clouds, gods, the world. Why not use human minds? That's really what we're about, and it's what I devote a lot of the book to kind of talking about is, how we construct an idea of another person's agency and mind, and how that engages then with the complex social brain, and how that then relates to how we deal with the world, and how that then relates to how we deal with our own mind, our own self-image, as as a social creature, being social with ourselves, being consciously self-aware. So yeah, it's it's a really complex subject. It's a really complex set of ideas, but I do think it has some legs in trying to kind of come to some kind of terms with what we're dealing with here.
Yeah, and I really like how it focuses on this notion of human beings as being social animals, and as social animals that have developed these brains and these cognitive structures in relationship to the social phenomenon of being an ape that is relating to other apes, that it comes with a certain set of cognitive predispositions, and that this is where then science is very different from, say, culture, because culture is involved with social relationships between the social animal of the human being and the social perception of the clouds or the rains or the universe or whatever it may be, or the deepest recesses of the psychedelic experience in the mind, versus science is not looking at how do we perceive things socially, but how can we perceive things from a scientific perspective. And that in these especially extraordinarily unusual states of consciousness, or at these boundaries between what we think we know and versus what we think we don't know, that our brain, our mind, our consciousness, our whole physiology automatically defaults to this socialized network of assumptions, and because that's how we can actually relate to other people. If we didn't have that, we wouldn't be able to relate. So it gets
that's what we do for 90% of our
yeah.
lives. So, with the 90% of human life is other humans. So, yeah.
Yeah, and that it's automatic, as you say, that all of these sets of mental functionings immediately come online. And
Yeah.
so that this helps us then to understand, well, why do these things appear within these psychedelic states? And that also helps explain, while they're not necessarily quote unquote real, that these are functions of the mind, functions of
Yeah.
how human consciousness works, given that we are these social biological creatures.
Yeah. I mean, for me, there's a lot to unpack in these thoughts. For me, one of the fundaments of a kind of scientific discourse is I observe that this thing is happening. Why? So when I started to experience encounters with beings, of course I check around, and of course, psychedelic encounters with beings are everywhere. They're not ubiquitous in the sense that everyone experiences them.
Right.
But a good, I think at one point I deal with some statistics, with quick and ready statistics. And I think I come up with a figure of between 33 and 67% of, people dealing with particular plants and drugs are going to, experience similar kinds of encounters. So I thought, from a scientific perspective, ask why. And so I asked a question, why beings? And, I was quite mind blown to find that everyone else just assumed beings happened,
Yeah.
and then went on an abstraction to explain something about the world. No one actually asked, well, hang on, why beings? Everyone just went, assume beings, now what? Now, this is very, very similar to something anthropologist Scott Atran talks about in relation to religion. If you think about philosophy, you have a proposition, and you kind of analyze, is proposition P true? Blah, 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 lots of thinking. Conclusion, P is true or not true, or conditionally true. Okay, that's philosophy. Religion doesn't do that. Religion goes, P is true. What does that mean? God is real because I feel God's love for me. What does that mean? Oh, I must do as God says. I must live in
Right.
a thoughtful, blah, 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 according to the commands of my religion. Never mind that God is real because I feel God's love is an entirely circular argument. That's how religions work, and they're open-ended by asking, what does that mean? Well, assume beings in visionary encounters. What does that mean? Well, that's the same kind of quasi proposition that Scott Atran proposes for religion. ask why beings, and what you get, and I've done this, at various psychedelic conventions that I either spoke at or visited, and I kind of go, why beings? And very often you get a deafening silence.
Yeah.
Just say I don't know. It's better, you know. Don't try and confabulate something or stutter and mutter. Just say I don't know. Um, and so, really, this idea of agency and sociality and um, being this automatic set of snap reality expectations really does give a good few legs in trying to explain why beings. You know, I think when you get into the whole social theory of agency and human social intelligence, you've got to kind of ask, why not beings? Why would it not be human-like beings? Humanoid beings, faces with eyes and mouths and intentions, whether those intentions are good or malevolent. Why, and the visionary being is always facing the human being, the visionary who arrives into that other space. You never get to some kind of, alien craft and they're kind of got their backs to you. Not now, we're busy,
Yeah.
piss off. You never get that. They're always very interested in you. They want to do something for or at or with or to you. It's always on your terms, in your expectations. One other thing I want to pick up on is, a lot of people may kind of, on hearing the word automatic, they may kind of seize up and go, well, humans aren't automatic. And one of the things that I like to think of these inference systems as, not so much as automatic systems, but as wild creative cascades. The creativity is entirely on the unconscious realm. But, some people talk about automatism as being just a series of triggers. I tend to think of them more as tripwires. You can kind of fall over them based on a stimulus, but also sometimes they don't trip. Some people don't see beings in visionary experiences. Some people, whilst fully equipped with all of the battery of human social agency-driven inference systems, don't believe in gods and spirits. So they don't necessarily trip. But when you're cognitively maxed out, you will fall back on the thing that you use 90% of your life for, which is the stuff you use to interact with other human beings, the very fast, quick stuff. And agency in particular is, because of its background ultimately isn't probably in sociality, but in predator detection systems, which is a raw survival thing. Agency is constantly alert to other agents, including unseen agents just beyond, if you ever see kind of wildlife footage of gazelles, they've got their head in the grass and they hear a rustle some way away. The heads are up, the ears are round, and they're like, that was definitely a lion. That was a lion. Okay, no, it wasn't. Head back down. Snap. Head back up. That was a lion. They're constantly vigilant. And, there is definitely a resonance between agency-driven predator detection systems constantly being vigilant to stuff just beyond what you can see that could kill you. And, many of these kind of boundary-driven agency experiences that are, kind of folk beliefs in wild spirits. I once said that the difference between an encounter with a predator and an encounter with a visionary being that you can't see, like a ghost, that's, behind the wall, but it can see you. The difference is really not that much. It's a raw survival terror. And an encounter with a visionary being is really broadly the same, but with an awe and elevation that, fear and awe-inspired, dumbstruck kind of thing. They're very similar sets of experiences and emotions. So yeah, there's something very primal about visionary beings, I think, as well as very, very human, in terms of the sociality and the inference systems. So yeah, it expands across the whole of the human being, really, to answer this question.
Yeah, and it's really just a fascinating approach, and I really want to encourage the listeners, go get the book. They Shimmer Within. If because there's so much information in there, and I think it's really well articulated, and it's also very personal with your own experiences. I've got I've got to let the dog out, but then I want to come back and talk about music. So just hold on one second.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so let's talk about music. Like I mentioned, sort of at the beginning of our conversation here, that I spent the day yesterday just having your albums kind of playing in the background as I was editing a book, and really enjoyed the sort of the ambient soundscapes and just all the different sounds and textures. So yeah, let's talk about music. How'd you get into music? What's your deal there?
So one of my best friends at university was, a reasonably classically trained musician. And he kind of discovered in me that I've never tested this out, but he's convinced I have perfect pitch. And he was kind of slightly jealous. He was like, because I don't play any instruments or anything. Well, anyway, fast forward to about 13, 14 years ago, and I was, burgeoning my career as an artist. And I also just decided, right, I'm just going to have a play around with music. Just have a play around and explore music. And I was kind of making kind of noodly ambient techno. And if I'm honest with you, it wasn't very good, but I rather liked it. And some of them were quite fun. And I used a few of them for art films that I was doing at the time to kind of promote my work. And they were a little bit fun. And then just the inspiration of it, somewhere around, 2007, 2008, it just blew out. And my art career took off. And, I say take off, it was occupying more of my time. So I kind of put it to one side. But since then, there's always been this kind of little voice tapping me on the shoulder going, what about music? What about music? And, I'd listen to some music and I'd imagine myself making that music, which is always a sure sign of, some unanswered question in life. Well, the beginning of 2020, coronavirus made its appearance in the world. And, many of us across the world were, found ourselves in lockdowns, to try and protect the vulnerable in our society. So we're all kind of, I'm suddenly finding myself, as an artist, being locked in your studio, there was a part of me that almost wanted to kind of raise my head and go, oh, is there a lockdown? I hadn't noticed, But this time was so strange and so unusual that I felt this urge to do something different. It was so different, I should be doing something different. And, almost magically, music popped up and said, hey, well, I'm still a question. So I went back to my old, digital audio workstation. I kind of just decided to, I managed to recover my FL Studio, and it had, I'd bought FL Studio with the synth Citrus, which is, I didn't know it at the time, but it's quite a good synth. And quite a versatile one. And, 3 months later, I ended up with a 72-minute album called Sparkling Isolation. And I sent parts of it to my best friend, who's this, classically trained musician, basically with the expectation, be gentle, It's not that good, but come on, be nice. And he kind of sent me a video kind of going, what the... I feel like someone... And I don't know if you noticed, but it's in one of the. I basically sampled his voice for one of the tracks in that first album, where snippets from it where he said, I feel like someone said, "Look at this yellow rock, isn't it nice and shiny? There, you can have this," and it's this massive gold nugget. And I'm like, "Oh, Dan, you're so kind. That's so lovely." But it's really just me noodling about trying to, it's not that good. And he's like, "No, it's much better than I ever expected of you." I was expecting to have to be kind, and I'm really not. So I just thought, I thought maybe this has got something in it. So I decided to try and test myself and make an EP that, didn't really go out the way I intended. So that robbed me of a lot of confidence. And then in the autumn here in the UK of 2020, we had a second lockdown. So I was going out on my bike a lot and just getting out. By then things were getting to me. I was emotionally, quite sad and upset at, really how many people were dying and how various different communities were actually responding in ways that I didn't think were that helpful to help us come together as humans to stop so many people suffering.
Yeah.
And I just cycled out into the wilds. I'd say to my husband, "I'm going out. I don't know when I'm going to be back," and I'd just end up in the hills. And while cycling in the hills, I would hear this music in my head. And so, I'd regularly stop, pull out my phone, pull out a recording device and be like, da, 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 just humming into it. And in the end, I must have amassed something like 100 of these. And I slowly realized these were all in the same key. I had something here that potentially was more than just a collection of short tracks, but could be, I hesitate to use the word symphony, but a grander work all in the same key. And that became my second album, There's Life on Broken Ground, which, funnily enough, my musical friend bloody hated. But it's my proudest work. I think it's really emotionally authentic to to how I was at the time. And that also told me that he was really being honest about that first album, because he was really honest about the second album and he didn't like it. So, yeah, I mean, as it turned out, it wasn't all in the same key, but, it's a single 48-minute body of work. And then, of course, we had a third lockdown in winter and spring of this year, and my gosh, was that ever hard. We had a really cold and dark winter, and we're all cooped up at home. So, yeah, I just really needed to feel space. And hence the third album was called Feel Space. Yeah. And I was quite surprised at how light and emotionally delicate it was. So I'm already setting off, to explore what I can do with this newfound kind of, I think it's a permanent fixture in my life now. And I've injured my knee as a climber. Life as a climber, you get lots of injuries. And so I've injured my knee, so I've been laid up for a month. And guess what? It's kind of like a fourth lockdown. Britain is back up and mostly running. Most of us are vaccinated and lots of restrictions have been cleared out. And here I am in my fourth personal lockdown and I'm making more music again. So, yeah, it feels like it's got a future. And one of the best things for me about this particular future in music is I have no real expectation of financial success or, hey, the world saying, wow, listen to Bruce's music. I'm just making it and putting it out there, and it's on my Bandcamp page and it's all there for free download, or you can listen to it for free. And, maybe some people will get back to me and maybe they won't, and maybe they'll just enjoy it, this meditative ambient stuff on their own. But I really feel free with it in a way that in some respects I don't feel with my art. Some part of me still as an artist, I've got to, I've got to show my art. My art has to be seen. And, you know, of course, we artists then beat ourselves up about that. But with music, I'm completely free. I don't care. It's wonderful.
Oh, it's beautiful. And I think it comes through in the music.
So, yeah, I'm really glad you enjoyed it. I'm glad it was a nice accompaniment for you.
Yeah, it really worked well. It's very dreamy. It's very textured, and it goes into different unexpected places in very gentle ways. I didn't experience anything jarring. You know, it was on in the background, and sometimes when I put background music on, or what I think is going to be background music, I find that it's distracting from what I'm doing, or there's some jarring element that comes in. It's like, oh wait, how did this happen? But there was this beautiful flow just from one song right into the next, and you could actually tell that most of the albums were kind of meant to be continuous. That just really ride it from one song into the next song. And
certainly second and third album, Broken Ground and Field Space, yeah, I conceived them as complete works. And yeah, I got to say, it's lovely to hear that you think it's, you know, nothing was jarring. Field Space in particular uses quite a lot of glitch. And that was a real technical nightmare. One, because, you know, glitch subjectively sounds louder than the sound really is because it's so sharp. But also, yeah, I didn't want it to be jarring. So I'm making gentle, meditative, ambient music with, you know, one of the most jarring sounding technologies. You know, stutter edit and, you know, or glitchy plugins and effects. So a big challenge for me was to try and make something glitchy that was still meditative. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it's lovely for me to hear you say that. But yeah.
Yeah, I'm really glad that you were sure to mention that to me so that I had the opportunity to go and listen to your music. Now, the last thing, I can't tell from the book itself because the images are black and white, but what is the primary medium that you're using for your art?
Well, my art, I have the images in the book are drawings. My art is basically acrylics, inks, and markers, and I sometimes use transparent UV lacquer to make dual image artworks. So my art comes across very, very colourful. But, you know, in the book, they are marker on cartridge paper. But what I then decided to do, I made these very, very thick black marker images. And then I took kind of silver markers and made little patterns within them as a kind of experimental visual style that I think was successful for the body of drawings for the book, but I couldn't really find any place for it in my wider arts practice. So yeah, I called those particular series of drawings, I think I called them Spooks I Have Known and Loved, in deliberate reference to Alexander Shulgin and his books. Yeah. But yeah, the front cover is again a slightly different style. That is silver markers and gray ink markers on a black card background. And that's part of a triptych which is reproduced towards the back of the book in the chapter where I talk about that 2012 2CB 2CI vision in some detail. And that triptych was made within, I think I worked on it on and off for about 6 months after the vision, but the majority of it was made within 2 weeks of that 2CB 2CI wild vision of the beings on my shoulder and, hey, do you think you're the only one in here kind of experience. But yeah, the medium for those drawings is kind of unique. And yeah, they are titled after specific experiences. The whole book is not just textually, but visually adorned with my personal experiences and encounters with beings, because I figured it was better to be honest. And if that means, you know, academic exposure within the academic world is not going to happen, fine. I'll float this boat on the ocean and people will pick it up when they can, you know?
Yeah. Well, I really enjoyed consuming all of your materials and felt a kinship with you in that, I also am a visual artist and I'm a musician and I like to put my own art
Yeah.
into my books. And actually, I wanted to ask you if you had made any audiobooks yet, because in listening to your music, because I like to use my own music in my audiobooks, and I was thinking, well, Bruce, if he doesn't have audiobooks, he should definitely make audiobooks, and he's got background music that is all ready to go.
Yeah. Someone asked me for They Shimmer Within. Oh, I prefer audiobooks. Do you have an audiobook of your book? And I was like, my first thought genuinely, first, I was very complimented by the fact that the person asked me this. But there was a part of me almost comedically that was kind of going, this is a brick,
Yeah,
this book.
yeah.
It's 580 odd pages with footnotes and asides and, precepts for the interested,
Yeah.
after notes and blah, 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 and, side tracks. And I just thought, I'm an artist, I'm a musician. I've just reignited. I was a poet before I was an artist. And I've been keeping that up quietly, very quietly in the background. I've just fired that back up, and I'm planning to release, several collections of poetry in the next 6 months, going back 25, 30 years in some cases. I'm trying to kind of put things together to be a bit of a filmmaker. I'm like, oh my God, I feel like, in the most wonderful way possible, I feel like I'm living 5 lives already. Please don't make me turn this brick into an audio book. But yeah, I realize that's a disadvantage of this book and my creative practice. I don't think I would have, it would take me months to turn this into an audiobook, which is why I kind of prefer podcasts like this, and then let folks discover it if they want to in their own way.
Yeah, I can see that would be really a huge undertaking, especially with all the footnotes and everything.
Yeah.
But that could be difficult.
Let me check. Even the main body of the text it's 400 pages, without all the footnotes and everything. So yeah, I was really complimented by the question, but I was like,
but
no.
I want
to do other things. I've got this independent research, life as well. So yeah.
Well, I can just share, as one self-published author to another, that half of all of my book sales are the audiobooks.
Right. Yeah. Fair enough.
Yeah.
Yeah, that does tell me I should probably get my house in order, right?
Well,
yeah.
So
I'm now looking with trepidation at this beast of a thing.
Yeah. So people can go to brucerimell.bandcamp.com. That's RIMELL.bandcamp.com to listen to your music. Is there a place they can go to see your art?
My art is, if you Google Bruce Rimell, you'll see the art vision space of Bruce Rimell, but it's biroz.net. That's BIROZ.net. Or Z if you're American. I forget this is.
Yes.
This is
Zed. What is this Zed
thing?
Let's
leave out my parochial Britishness for a while. And BIROZ.net. And if you just Google Bruce Rimell, They Shimmer Within, you'll have, if you're really interested in buying it, then you'll have lots of options. If you really want to support me, go to the lulu.com site to buy it, because, Amazon take a lot more out of the revenue. Google Books has, I think, for free, about 80% of the book. So, if you don't want to buy it, then, that's fine. You just want to explore it, then the Google Books version has about 80% of it for free. So again, being free and easy about my creative life post-pandemic these days, I'm happy to say that. But, if you really are interested and want to dig in and want to support me, then lulu.com, search for They Shimmer Within there, and you'll find it.
Yeah, so you're happy with lulu.com. I used them. That's where I started out self-publishing, but then went over to CreateSpace, and then CreateSpace was bought by Amazon, and now it's part of Kindle. So it's all one thing. So I haven't used Lulu in a while, but you're happy with.
Yeah, I'm still happy with them. My poetry books upcoming have been published with them, but strangely they go to Google Books and they don't put out an Amazon, and they don't put out the look inside feature anymore. So I've got to look into how I'm going to do that, because a preview of a book is certainly a good way to help sell it. And poetry, certainly in English, poetry doesn't sell very much anyway, which I'm fine with. I say that because I'm learning Welsh, and the Welsh love poetry. They buy it in droves. And I remember when I lived in Japan, poetry was a big thing there too. But in the English speaking world, poetry isn't a big thing, so I need to look into that. But yeah, I'm happy with them for now.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
Great. Well, it's really been great getting to know you, being able to enjoy your various works, and to speak with you today, Bruce. It's been a great conversation.
And thank you for taking the time to explore my research and my music. That's just been a wonderful thing. Thank you very much.
Well, you're very welcome, and thank you for reaching out when I put out that post on Facebook and helping to make this connection and to make this conversation happen today.
Fantastic. Genuinely, I was surprised at myself. I thought I'll just put it out there. During the pandemic, I've been like, no, I'm not really that bothered about promoting myself. But this one, I just felt, yeah, I've seen your work. I think somewhere in the archive, I've got one of your books about Salvia. And I thought, yeah, I think this will resonate. So yeah, I'm very happy that you took the time. Thank you.
All right. Well, me too. Well, thanks for your time, Bruce.
Fantastic.